Hi, my name is Steve Elzinga, and I want to talk to you about the church. When I was 5 years old, my family belonged to a good church. We were church going people, and the impression I got as a child is that we took church very seriously. On Saturday night, we had to shine our shoes, we had to take a bath, and then on Sunday morning, we had to get dressed in our best clothes. And we went to church and we sang some songs. There was a sermon, there was the offering, there were all the things that we associate with going to church. That's a picture of me when I was 5 years old. You see, I'm dressed to the nines. And, but I don't recall as a child getting anything out of it. I got that it was important, but I don't remember a single sermon growing up. And, I don't know if I loved the songs. And then as I got older and I became a teenager and I started listening to a whole different kind of music than we sang at church, there was sort of a dissonance between, what I was listening to all week long and then church on Sunday. And frankly, I was just bored with church. In fact, I wrote a little paper when I was in high school, Why Church is Boring. Okay. Now, what's really interesting is I put this as an illustration a couple days ago. I was writing this and I put that as an illustration. And then I was ready to do this message yesterday and tape it, but then something happened, so I didn't do it. And then this morning, I got up at 6 o'clock and I had asked my wife the day before for old pictures. I wanted to show a picture of when I was 5 years old. And so she got this big tub of pictures and put them in our living room. And I found that picture, scanned it in, and so on. But then this morning, I was sitting next to that big tub of pictures. And I found a picture when I was in high school and I had really red hair, long red hair. And I thought, boy, things change. And then I saw underneath the pile of pictures, there was a letter. So I pulled it out and it was a letter that my wife wrote in 1990 to her parents. And so I read that letter and then I put it back and there were a bunch of other pictures. And then I saw peeking under a bunch of pictures another letter and it looked like my handwriting. So I pulled it out from the pile and guess what? It was, let's see, where is it? Here it is. I don't know if you can see that, but this is the paper that I wrote back when I was in high school. Church Boring, Steve Elzinga. So I want to read it to you. I thought what are the chances of that? That the tub is out there, that I'm looking through, this has to be of God. There's just no other explanation. So here I wrote, is the church service boring? I personally think it is. And so do many I have talked to. And I think many are afraid to admit so. Now, why is this so? It starts when you're young. Your parents take you to church, and after a few Sundays, you've counted everything that can be counted. So to pass the time, you start daydreaming. Well, that usually carries you right through till when you're older. I think the Christian Reformed people, that's the denomination I belong to, I think the Christian Reformed people are the best daydreamers in the world. Another thing is the service itself. It seems like it's the same old thing every Sunday. We have to follow our rigid order to worship God properly. It would be a sin to be happy. Apparently, I thought church was a somber occasion. How many people look forward to the service? How many people count it the highlight of their week? Shouldn't it be? I think it should, but it isn't. Most ministers seem to repeat themselves and stretch everything out just to meet their time quota. Guilty. I think you should preach as long as it takes and get to the point and then quit. Saying the same thing 10 times over doesn't dig in deeper. It just turns people off. Boy, this was good for me. I got to preach tomorrow morning. at my church. Now, I think a good reason why you don't hear people talk like this is because it's so easy to go to church. I mean, you just have to sit through 2 services a week and you're done. There's absolutely no pressure on you, and you don't have to contribute a lousy thing. People don't want pressure. They don't want to feel uncomfortable, so they continue as old and don't work for changes. They know they don't get much out of a service, but they think they have done their duty and therefore don't desire change. No one is involved but the minister. It's all one-sided. Church is supposed to be a place where God's people come to worship Him as a group of believers, but we really don't do anything, therefore don't get much out of it. I think people ought to get worked up, slapped in the face, to get involved, put pressure on people. Like when the minister comes down off the pulpit with a mic and asks anyone if they'd like to thank the Lord for something. That puts pressure on everyone in the church, not just the one who gets up and thanks the Lord. I think we are dead and that we ought to liven things up. And like after church, I think, and then I go on and on and on. By the way, the teacher said, you make some valid observations. And anyway, I got an A+ on this one, so maybe that teacher agreed. So, I grew up thinking that church was boring. Then I believed in God. I believed in the truth of the Bible. I just thought that somehow we weren't communicating it. At least it wasn't communicating to me. And so I felt kind of the call of God to serve God in church, I think, as a young person. And eventually I went to Calvin College and I went to Calvin Seminary. This is a picture of my wife and I. She graduated the same day from Calvin College that I graduated from Calvin Seminary. And that very afternoon we got on a plane and went to the Philippines. And I taught at a seminary and Bible college in the Philippines for a year. A little shout out to all the Philippine students at Christian Leaders Institute. Part of my heart is always in the Philippines. After the Philippine experience, we came back and the missionaries wanted me to come back as a missionary. And I thought about it, but I thought I'm going to come to a foreign country as a young person, just graduated from seminary, and I'm going to teach a whole denomination about how to do things when I've never even led a church myself. So I thought, no, I should take a call in my own country and see if I can even lead one church before I start teaching anybody else how to do anything. So I took a country church, a little country church, and I was there for 4 years, and we did a few little changes. The church was friendly, and it doubled in size. And I thought, wow, if you can double an old established church by making a few changes and trying to be friendly, I thought, what could you do if you planted a church with unchurched people in mind, to reach the community? And so I got a chance after 4 years. This is the little postcard that the home missions department of our denomination made. This is my wife, and I had 3 boys at that time. We had another one while we were in Canada. But so we went off to Vancouver to plant a church, and then from scratch. And how do you do that? I was like, I didn't really know how. And I'm not an extrovert by nature. I'm an introvert. And I thought, how am I going to meet people? How am I going to get people to come to my church? You got to go out there. And so I remember one Sunday afternoon, my wife and I, we girded up our loins, to use biblical analogies. We, got our confidence going. We prayed to God, and we went outside with a clipboard and a pen, and we knocked on our neighbors' doors. And we asked them 3 questions. You should write them down. The first question we asked, knocked on the door, someone came, we said, do you regularly attend church? And if they said yes, we said, well, thank you. We're really looking for input from people who don't go to church. If they said no, we said, great, because you're the people we need to talk to. You're the ones that know things that we need to learn. So I'm trying to honor people. Second question, why do you think most people don't go to church? Now, this is a very subtle question. This is just a really good question. Now, if I had knocked on someone's door and asked them, why don't you go to church? See, that would be offensive. But by just changing it slightly, why do you think? See, I'm coming to you for your expertise. I don't know something and you do, and I want to know what you know. See, I'm honoring them. Why do you think people don't go to church? Well, they are eager to tell you. And by the way, they end up telling you why they don't go to church. And then the third question, if you were to go to a church, not that you would, but if you were, what would you like to see or not see? And what I love about this question, not only for the things that they tell you and the insights you might get from that, but with this question, you're getting them subtly to ask, to actually get them to think about going to church. They haven't thought about going to church at all. But when you ask this question, they start thinking about, well, maybe I would go to church if. Oh, so you might go to church. See, it's a very subtle question. But the question I want to focus on with you is question 2. Why do you think most people don't go to church? You know what the number one answer was? The number one answer that we heard over and over and over and over again, the number one reason why they thought people didn't go to church, and probably the number one reason why they didn't go to church. You ready? Sermons are boring and irrelevant. Sermons are boring and irrelevant. When I tallied up all those things that we got from knocking on doors, I felt justified because that's how I felt growing up my whole life. Sermons are boring and irrelevant. So I learned that and I thought, okay, so I have to be not boring and irrelevant. Thought that's the goal. Can't be boring and irrelevant. So we worked hard at it. We were meeting in a gym. And, gyms are boring, but we put 17 banners hanging from the ceilings. We had a stage that we built. We had to set up every week. We put trees and plants. And we just did this gym up. And when people walked in, they're expecting a gym, but they walk in, it's like, whoa, this is amazing. And then the music, my wife is into music. We had, guitars and synthesizers and drums, and we did traditional and blended and contemporary, and we were very creative. The music was awesome. And then the sermons. I worked hard at sermons. I worked harder than I ever did in that established church that I was at for 4 years. And I found that my preaching style changed. When I was preaching to the established church, I'm preaching to people who grew up in the church most of their lives, and it was like I had to wake them up. They're complacent. They're taking things for granted. Hey, wake up. You think you're saved? Well, you better listen. Maybe you're not, So you're like, poking them and prodding them and trying to, get them to be alive. Because, in my perception, they were kind of dead. So kind of negative in some ways, kind of pushy. And I found with my church plan, I'm talking to people who don't believe. I have to be positive. And I have to apply the scriptures. The traditional church, they're impressed if you can show how, the New Testament fulfills the Old Testament and what this Greek word or this Hebrew word, they're impressed when you read them the study Bible. Okay, but new people don't care about any of that. They want to know, how does this old book relate to my life? How does it make a difference in my marriage, in my family, and what I'm going through? What answers does the Bible give to the questions that I have? And so I worked on my sermons, and a lot of times we illustrate them with dramas and special numbers, and it worked. In 3 years, our church grew from just a start to 500 people. And this is in Vancouver, British Columbia. That's an incredibly, Canada is already kind of secular, and the West Coast is the most secular place in all of Canada. And we grew to 500 people in 3 years. I mean, in some ways that was amazing. But then I had my Florida experience. If you read the reading for the first message for this whole series, then you possibly remember my Florida story where, I got burned out and I went to Florida and God spoke to me and I got back to a walk with God. And what I realized was, I was trying to make church not boring, okay? And our church was not boring, and it was exciting and people came. But what happened is I made church the surrogate walk for God for people. In other words, people were coming to the church service and that was their walk with God. They didn't have a personal walk with God. They didn't have a marriage walk with God. They didn't have a family walk with God. They weren't, meeting with friends and relationship, with people around them and sharing their walk with God with others. They just came to church on Sunday and they had a walk with God through whatever we did on Sunday. The Bible that they read was the Bible that I presented on Sunday. And, when they tried to read the Bible on Wednesday, they open it up and they start reading the Bible. But, there's no drama, there's no song, there's no person who's studied it for 10 hours and then presents it in a winning way and applying it to your life. They're just reading the Bible and going, this is way too hard. Close the Bible, I'll just wait for Sunday. So what happened was that I was providing an interesting surrogate walk with God. So, I grew up in church was boring on the one hand, and so now I try to liven it up, and there's still a problem. And that begs the question, do we even need church? It seems like there's so many problems with church, doesn't it? I mean, haven't you had problems with the church? Maybe you're trying to use your gifts in the church. The leaders aren't acknowledging that you're learning things and that you might be capable of doing something. Or, people often have been a part of this church and then somebody says something happens, the minister does something, the leadership does something, the church changes its direction. There's all these problems associated with church. A lot of people that don't go to church have no problem with God. They have no problem believing in the Bible, but they do have a problem with church, that somewhere along the line they got burned. And I think that's even true in the New Testament church. I mean, here's Hebrews chapter 10:24. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. I mean, the church has just gotten off the ground. It's only 30, 40 years old. And already people are not going, are getting out of the habit of going to church. So that begs the question, why do we even need church? Why do we even bother? Isn't a walk with God in your personal life good enough? Or a walk with God in your marriage? Or a walk with God with your family and with a few other friends? Isn't that good enough? I mean, why do we even need the church? Well, maybe we just don't need it. It's just more trouble than maybe it's worth. In the reading that you're going to do today, I start out with our need to be a part of something bigger. We just have a need to be a part of something bigger. If you're in the sports world and you play football or soccer, as we call it in the United States, it's a game kids play, anywhere. But it's also a game played in the schools and in the high schools and in the colleges and the universities. And then there's the professional leagues. And then there's the World Cup every now and again. And the whole world goes crazy over the World Cup. You see, all these big entities make it so that kids play the sport. See, it exists because there's bigger groups that, there's rules and there's, people look up to the professional players and they get inspired. And the whole thing goes together. Without the bigger thing, the smaller thing falls apart. Things start changing and soon you've lost everything. And that's true with hobbies. It's true with government. I mean, we don't just run our neighborhoods don't control everything. Our neighborhoods are part of barrios or towns or cities, and then regions and states and provinces, or whatever your country calls them. And then we have country borders. It's like the big is necessary to support the small, because we feel bolder with the big. We feel like we're a part of something when we're a part of something that's bigger. And when it's just small, it seems to last for a little while and then it just disappears. And it's the same thing is true about the church. Another illustration would be like a fire. You have a fire going and you have these coals, and then you take out a coal and you separate that coal from the fire. What happens? It grows cold. It goes out. The coal has to be in the fire to keep going. So we need the church. And yes, the church has problems, but of course it has problems because there's people. And guess what? People are sinners. And guess what sinners do? Sinners hurt one another. The church is a group of sinners gathered together. And it's when we recognize that we do have problems, and that's why we all still need a Savior. That's the beauty of the church, as well as the struggle. So we need the church. So back to the problem I had in my church plant. Okay, so I created an environment where the church was not boring, but I created a surrogate situation where the church service was robbing people of their walk with God in their personal life, their marriage, their family, and among their friendship circle. So what I want to do is I want to make an illustration. In the reading, I use the illustration of baseball, but here in this presentation, I want to use the illustration of the power plant. You know how Jesus said, I am the light of the world, but he called us to be a light of the world. So I want to use that analogy. So I'm going to do a little drawing here. So here we have the church. Okay, and the church is surrounded by homes. Okay, these are my little crude drawings. Okay, so the way I was thinking about church is, this was my focus. How do I build the church? Okay, I can't build the church without people, without these homes. And I need the talents and the gifts of the homes to, sort of help the church. I was focused on making the church successful, and I need people to make the church successful. So the church is going to be the light to the world, okay? So I need the energy of each home to use the talents and gifts and abilities and everything else to pour the energy from the homes into the church so that the church can be the light. The church is the focal point, okay? So then I need great sermons and all these things. Okay. So what I came to see after my Florida experience, so here we'll draw it again. Here's the church. Here's the homes. Okay. All right. When you have a walk with God church, see, the focus is actually the other way. See, God is out here empowering the church through the Holy Spirit. Okay, so this is the electricity going into the power plant. The church is a power plant, but the church supplies power to the homes. See, now the arrows go this way. Arrow going from the church. In other words, the focal point is not the church, the focal point is the home. And each home becomes the light to the world. Each home. And each person in the home, and wherever the person goes all week long. So do you see that by making the home the focus, the light is actually expanding all over the city? And I don't mean to say that the church isn't a light too, but people aren't looking for the church. People are looking at people. People are looking at you in your neighborhood. People are looking at you in the workplace. And are you the light? So how can the church help the home actually succeed at something? That fundamentally changed my whole view of church. I was thinking that the people existed to build the church, instead of the church exists to build the people. The church and its programs, and I know you need people from the church to help do that, but the point of the church service is not the church service. The point of the church service is to equip the people so that they can be the church as they leave, as they go to their homes, as they go to their work, as they go to school, as they walk around their neighborhood, as they engage in the community around them 7 days a week. The church service is the culmination of all the walking with God during the week. And people bring that to the church, and then that service is so exciting that it then goes out to the world. Ephesians 4 says it so beautifully. Ephesians 4 verse 11. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers, in other words, leaders, right? These are leaders, to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach a unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we'll be no longer infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and the cunning and craftiness. The cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Okay, I want to talk about that a minute. Who's behind the deceitful scheming? It's the devil. Okay, so what does the devil do? See, let me go back to we need the big, right? We need the big. We need the thing called the church because that's a bigger entity than our personal walk, our marriage walk, our family walk. We need that in our lives or our personal marriage and family walk falls apart. We need to be a part of a whole group of people doing that. But why are there so many problems in church? You build the big and there seems like there's problems in the church. You know why? It's because the devil, I believe the devil focuses all his energy on the church. So the problem with something becoming big is the people in charge of it get a big head. Okay? That's what happened in Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, right? The people want to be a part of something big because they have protection, they have security. When we're all together, we have a security. So they're going to build this tower so that they can, maintain their bigness. But what do? Do they just maintain their bigness and the positive things that being a part of something big accomplishes? No. If you go back to Genesis chapter 11, you can read that they wanted to build a tower that reached to heaven. Why? So that they could stay safe, so they could maintain, visual sight of each other? No, so that they could make a name for themselves. See, the problem with the big is all of a sudden you get big. And you start doing it for the wrong reasons. And we see that in the church, where pastors, build a big church and they start thinking it's about them. And their name is plastered on everything. And it's the original sin. It's the same sin we find in Genesis chapter 3. I mean, Adam and Eve had a perfect life. They're walking with God every day. They got fruit trees. All their needs are taken care of. And then the serpent, the devil, comes up and says, hey, did God say you couldn't eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden? And they said, no, God said we could eat the tree. It's just the tree in the middle of the garden we can't eat. Oh, yes, that one in the middle. Do you know what that one's about? That's about being like God. God doesn't want you to be like him. Or to be not just like God, but to be a God. You see, that's always the danger with the big. And the devil uses that. Oh, Pastor, you've built such a great church. You are so awesome. Yes, I think I am. And all of a sudden, church becomes a political thing, and leadership and vying for power and who you know and all the brokenness that we see in the world as it struggles with the bigness of things. I think it's the devil that comes in. So we need to fight against that. Instead, verse 15, it says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect mature, a mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Okay? Pastor, you're not in charge. As you're learning and growing and you volunteer in the church because you're at Christian Leaders Institute, it's not about you being in charge. Christ is always in charge. We are always servants. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. Church is a team effort. Church requires the energy of everyone involved. When I wrote that little paper, why church is boring, I didn't know anything at that time. But I mentioned that, why is it the minister does everything? Why isn't it, I said, isn't a church service the meeting of a body of believers to worship God? Shouldn't we all be somehow involved in this? The church service itself is a culmination. I said, when I planted a church and I tried to make it lively and I wanted it not boring, but I made it into a surrogate walk. The people weren't walking with God in their personal lives, their marriage, their families, and sharing it with their friends. They were just doing it on Sunday morning with me. So I was robbing them of their walk with God. And so then when I came back from Florida, I was like, no, I got to get people to walk with God. Well, that changed what the church service was. See, what is a church service? A church service shouldn't be the surrogate walk. It should be the culmination of all the walks. In other words, if every person in your church is walking with God every day, reading their Bible, listening to God, worshiping, and then every couple is doing the same thing, and every family is doing the same thing, and when friends get together, they're sharing the Word of God, they're praying for each other, and that's happening, and people are singing and worshiping in their homes all week long. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a church like that? Where that's happening all week long. And now all these people who have been worshiping God all week long in all the relationships, they come together in a church service. Can you imagine what that would be like? See, it's the culmination of all the walks. Not the one walk, I am now going to walk for you people. No. See, as a minister, when I'm leading a worship service, I don't think of myself as downloading all kinds of things on people. I'm the one that gets to culminate everything. Hey, how have we been worshiping this past week, and how can we celebrate it this Sunday? How can the prayer we do in the church service be the culmination of all the prayers? This isn't the only prayer we've done. So how do we do that? How do I make my sermon the culmination of all the Bible reading that people have done all week long? You know how we do it in my church? We have a reading track. Right now we're reading through the New Testament. All of us together. There's a reading track. We read, so many verses every single day, every family, every small group, every program that we have. We're all in this together. And then on Sunday, I preach out of what everyone read. See, I'm not doing something different. I'm doing what my people are doing. And as the minister, as the preacher, I get to, talk to people all week what they thought about this passage. We have an app and people, chime in and this is what they think. And then this sermon, we take some of that stuff. This is what so-and-so. The Holy Spirit is speaking to all the people in my church and I use it. The church service is the culmination of all the walks with God. All right, I just want to conclude. I want to give sort of a practical illustration of everything that I'm talking about. I want to share a little bit of the vision statement that I wrote for our church years ago, trying to incorporate this connections kind of thinking. So I wrote, first of all, the home, which is steps 1 through 3. I call them steps, but they're the connections, right? Your personal connection to God, your marriage, and your family. The home is the basic building block of society and the church. The faith is passed down best in homes. As a group of people, we want to help each other succeed in the home or the dorm, the apartment, condo, house, whatever. We seek to do this by encouraging the basic Christian practices that have characterized the passing of the faith for centuries. These practices include reading the Bible every day, Bible memorization, singing, worship, hospitality, and sharing with others. We then seek to help the home become the lighthouse to the neighborhood, the community, and even the world. Those without stable homes, we seek to connect to stable homes. So that's connections 1 through 3. Then small groups or your relationship, friendship circles. Our small groups try to meet 2 or 3 times a month to help support the home-based practices. So the goal of relationships is to help you in your connection to God, your marriage connection, and your family connection to God. The small groups are like transformer stations boosting the signal to the homes so that they can be lighthouses in the darkness. Most groups will start out with studies that help people get a walk with God in their personal life, their marriage, and their family. They will then follow with a study that helps the groups reinforce the Bible readings and the prayer, but will also help members start doing hospitality with others who need a walk with God. The hope is that each member will start their own group one day. Similar studies that accomplish the same basic goals will be considered and developed. We hope to grow many options that accomplish the basic purpose of our small groups. Then I talk about programs. Programs are specialized small groups whose purpose is to support the practices and habits, the Jesus culture we're trying to support in our homes. So in other words, we don't just have a youth program. We have a youth program that doesn't just entertain the children, but actually a youth program that tries to help the parents succeed in their own home. What good is it if the youth program is a wild success at church, but parents are failing in their own home? And then the worship service. This is Connection 5. That's what we're talking about here in this session. The goal of the Sunday morning worship is to be the culmination of worship. The Bible reading, the memorization, the singing, the praying, the sharing that has been going on all during the week, all for the praise and glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. Not only is God praised, but we, the body, are built up and encouraged in the Jesus culture that we've been trying to live in our homes, our small group activities, our neighborhoods, workplaces, and our communities. So I hope this has been helpful. I want to just leave you with Romans 12, verse 5. It's the first verse that we memorized in our church. I thought it was simple. I thought it summarized the church in a couple lines. We belong to each other, and each of us needs all the others. Why don't you say it with me? We belong to each other, and each of us needs all the others. And now from memory, we belong to each other, and each of us needs all the others.